Shalom Aleichem. Erev Tov again. First, I want to say Mazal Tov. I see Taylor on the screen. Mazal Tov again on the beautiful Brit. And I hope you and Avi and, of course, Eitan are doing well. Bezrat Hashem. I also wanted to mention that tonight, Chacham Yonatan shared with me, is the Askara of Harav Uziel, who was one of the early chief rabbis in Israel and probably one of the greatest visionaries we ever had. And sometimes I think if we learned his books more and others less, the state of Israel would look very different, because he had a vision not just for religious people, not just for Sephardim. What does a world look like? Not just for Jews. And there are some really good books, both in English and, of course, his works in Hebrew, that I can't recommend enough. I think we even have in Spanish, am I right? They translated Chacham Uziel's book in we don't know. Okay. On that note,
Marlene tells me there are books. Is it in English? I tell her
it's barely in Hebrew. I know.
I can't even tell you that.
All right. So tonight we're going to be looking at a couple of different books. So let me tell you if you want to take them out. We're going to look number one in Melachim Bet. Okay, Kings 2. We're also going to be looking into Yeshayahu. We're going to look a little bit into Divrei Hayamim, Tehillim. And then we're going to do some Gemarot. So we're going to actually touch on both Talmud Bavli and Yerushalmi, which unfortunately is much less learned. But we're going to touch on both. If you have an iPad near you, I will help you with that as far as what you want to look at. If you don't, and you have a phone, that's fine. If you like books like I do, that's probably going to be your best friend. But that's what we're going to look at today. Now, disclaimer, we're going to start with something, but don't worry, you're not in a 12-step meeting, okay? Why do I say that? How many of you heard of the Serenity Prayer? Okay, so the Serenity Prayer, every 12-step meeting starts with it. The source of it is actually quite unknown. They think that maybe it was invented by somebody in the 1930s, maybe not. But for those of you familiar, the prayer goes as follows, yes? Everybody stands up by the meeting, normally holds hand, and they say the following: God, give me the serenity to overcome the things I can, to accept the things, the courage to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. I'm going to repeat it because I think it's such an important prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. And today I really want to talk to you about two characters who struggle with both of these. It's going to be a father and a son. And one of them needs the serenity to understand, this I can't change. The other one needs the courage to understand, this is something in my power. I am able to, I can change it. Come to the table. And then lastly, to be able to differentiate between the two, right? Because sometimes you see people who are pushing walls and they don't realize the wall's not going to move. Either you're going to move or you're going to get knocked down, but the wall's not moving. And then you see other people who their whole life they're struggling to move places because all they built were fortresses in their mind that they can't get over. And they need somebody else to say, hey, it's your imagination. There's nothing really there. So I want to look at two characters with you who are, like I said, a father and a son. And both of them struggle in very interesting ways. Who am I talking about? We're going to look at Chizkiyahu HaMelech, right? And we're going to look at his son, Menashe. Very good, Elchanan. We're going to look at the two of them. Chizkiyahu HaMelech struggles in the capacity of being paralyzed by fear. He is terrified. In a minute, we'll see that rightfully so. His fear is not unfounded. Menashe HaMelech has the exact opposite problem. He just head straight into trouble. And unfortunately, by the time he decides to do Teshuvah, the consequences are so great that even with a complete Teshuvah, the brakes are lost already. I want to look at these two characters with you and then talk about, so what does it mean personally for us? Yes? I'm looking at you, Milka. Maybe we could say a big refuah shalema. Milka, tell me your brother's name. Daniel Eliyahu ben Avraham Avinu, he should have a complete and full recovery, and Bezrat Hashem, he should come home to his family and to his wife, and Bezrat Hashem, we should only hear good news. So let's talk about Chizkiyahu HaMelech. What do you know about the king Chizkiyahu? Anything? Have you heard his name before? Yes. What do you know about him?
About his son Menashe, so he tried not having a son. I don't know how he tried not having a son, so he wouldn't have Menashe, and then the prophet you can that he should have a son, even if he knows he's going back to be Menashe, and then Menashe becomes one of our words.
So Elchanan didn't just tell you about Chizkiyahu. He told you exactly the story that I want to tell you. So Chazak u'Baruch Elchanan. And we're going to look inside now and see the story. Now, I have to tell you that this story has been recorded twice in the Navi. I'm starting with the story. Yeah, I'm starting with that story. Yeah. About Chizkiyahu? No, about Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Okay, so open up with me to Melachim Bet, which is going to be Kings 2, Perek Chaf, chapter 20. And let's look at the beginning. Pasuk Aleph. So again, we're in Kings 2, chapter 20, verse 1. Now, to give you some context, this prophecy that we're going to look at, this conversation between Yeshayahu the prophet and Chizkiyahu, happens 3 days before Sancherib. Remember the king from Assyria, who comes from the northeast to attack Israel? This conversation happens 3 days before. Ultimately, Chizkiyahu HaMelech wins this war and manages to drive Sancherib out. Unfortunately, that victory doesn't last forever, and eventually we know that the 10 tribes are taken back with Sancherib, the king, back to Assyria, and that's where we have our 10 lost tribes. But this conversation takes place 3 days before that, a battle. Now, let me tell you for a minute who Chizkiyahu HaMelech was. So if you recall, last week we talked about the split between the kingdoms, between Rechavam and Yarovam. Unfortunately, after Rechavam, we have a set of tragedies where one king after the next is just completely horrible, not just to the Jewish people, but also to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, I was telling my husband today, we were talking about how if Jews today learned history, they wouldn't be so afraid of current events. People in general are always scared of what's happening in the present because they don't learn what happened in the past. History repeats itself, not just global history, Jewish history. We've had hard times, we've had civil wars, we've had bigger fights going on. Shlomo HaMelech says, En davar chadash tachat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. And sometimes we start panicking because we worry, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm going to learn. Hopefully, I'm going to look at history. And if I'm wise, I'll be able to learn from history. Because if I could learn from the mistakes of our past, we don't have to repeat them. But there's nothing new. The kings were awful. They did not follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Most of the Jewish people were not religious. This is not a new problem. So what happens? Chizkiyahu HaMelech is known for bringing the Jewish people back to a place where our Chachamim tell us that little children, what do I mean little children? The ones that are playing outside in the hall with iPads. If you would stop them in the street and ask them the most complicated questions of the laws of purity, they knew the answers. Because Chizkiyahu HaMelech, when he became the king, he through force made everybody go back and learn Torah. He would put swords, it says, in everybody's doorway and tell them either you're going to learn or you're going to be killed. And he managed to turn the entire nation back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Chizkiyahu HaMelech, one of our most righteous kings. So what happens? If you look at chapter 20, Perek Chaf, Bayamim haim, so in those days, meaning right before the war with Sancherib, Chalak Chizkiyahu lamut. Chizkiyahu HaMelech gets deathly ill. Vayavo elav Yeshayahu ben Amotz hanavi. So the Navi comes to him, Vayomer elav, and he says to him the following, Ko amar Adonai, this is what Hashem said, Tzav levetecha ki met ata velo tichyeh. Start preparing yourself for death. Talk to your family, create a will, get yourself ready to part because you will not survive this illness. What does Chizkiyahu HaMelech do? Vayasev et panav el hakir. He turns aside from the Navi. And the Malbim says it's not actually that he turns to the wall, but rather he turns inside. In Hebrew, we say the kirot levavecha, the walls of your heart. He turns inward to see what went wrong. Vayitpalel el Adonai lemor, and he starts praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, saying the following, Ana Adonai, zechor na et asher hitalachti lefanecha be'emet. Hashem, please remember my good that I've done, the Teshuvah that I brought the nation to. Uvlevav shalem v'atov beinecha asiti vayef Chizkiyahu bechi gadol. He cried a terrible amount. And what happens? Vayi Yeshayahu lo yatsa chatzer hatichona udvar Adonai ha'elav leimar. Yeshayahu didn't even yet leave. He's still in the king's courtyard. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go back. Shuv v'amart el Chizkiyahu. Go back to him and tell him the following. Nigidami ko amar Adonai Elohei David avicha. Tell him, the father of David HaMelech, the God of your father, David HaMelech, he heard your prayers. Ra'iti et dimatecha. I saw your tears. Hineni rofeh lach. I'm going to heal you. B'yom hashlishi ta'aleh bet. Adonai, don't worry, you're going to recover. You're going to come back to the Bet HaMikdash. V'osafti al yamecha 15 shana. And I'm going to give you another 15 years of life. Umikaf melech Ashur atzilcha, and I will save you from the hands of Sancherib, the king of Ashur. V'et ha'ir hazod v'ganoti al ha'ir hazod lemani u'leman David avdi. And I promise you, I will guard over you the city of Yerushalayim and make sure that there's peace. And then Yeshayahu tells him how to heal himself and how he could know that this is going to come true. And I want to take you for a minute to Gemara to understand what was the conversation between Yeshayahu and Chizkiyahu. What's the background over here? So if you can, open up if you have Sefaria, otherwise please use your ears. We're going to look at, going to Talmud. I just read chapter 20. No. Look into Berachot. Okay, so we're going to look into the Talmud. Click on Berachot, and it's going to be Berachot 10a. Then scroll down, if you're on Sefaria, to number 27. Now, there's a backstory to Yeshayahu and Chizkiyahu. I'm not going to read it to you inside, but I'm going to tell it to you briefly. You have to understand our culture to understand that respect is something very important. The Navi and the king were having a dispute of who should come visit who. The Navi said, of course the king comes to me. Look at all of his ancestors. When they needed help, they came to find the prophet, not the other way around. The king said, I don't understand. I'm the king of the Jewish people. I'm the top of the food chain. If the Navi wants to come talk to me, he should come to my palace. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu managed to make a situation that both of them were appeased. What happens? Chizkiyahu HaMelech gets sick. Hashem sends a nevuah to Yeshayahu and says, go tell him this prophecy. So nobody's kavod got hurt. But now I want to read to you what was the exchange between Yeshayahu HaNavi and the king. So look at number 27. So we're walking into the middle of that conversation. Ma'asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what did he do to bring the two of them together? Hevi yisurim al Chizkiyahu. He brought suffering to Chizkiyahu. V'amar lo Yeshayahu, and then he told Yeshayahu, Lechu v'aker et hacholeh. It's a mitzvah to go visit the sick. We learn that from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who's the first one to go visit the sick? Very good. What happened to Avraham Avinu? He had a Brit Milah. Yes? Brit Milah is not very comfortable at his age. Not at any age, I'm sure. Right? They say, the baby had a Brit Milah and for a year he couldn't walk. You can imagine with Avraham Avinu, at his advanced age, Hashem comes to do Bikur Cholim. So he tells Yeshayahu HaNavi, go now to the king. Shenemar, like it says, Bayamim Ahem, like we just read, Chalach Chizkiyahu lamut, Vayavo elav Yeshayahu ben Amoz HaNavi. And he tells him the prophecy. He tells him, Ki metata velo tichye. You're going to die and you're not going to live. Metata. He tells Chizkiyahu, you're going to die from this world, ba'olam hazeh. Velo tichye ba'olam haba. But you're also not going to live on for eternity. Amar le. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech says to Yeshayahu, Mai kulei. What's all this for? Why am I... Death is one thing, but why death from this world and the next world? Amar le, so Yeshayahu tells him, Mishum, like Elchanan told us, Mishum de lo asakt b'pirya urivya, because you didn't take the time to do the first commandment that humanity had, which is, what is the mitzvah of pirya urivya? Oh, Hashem commanded man, Piru urevu umilu et haaretz, be fruitful and multiply, and fill up the earth with people. Hashem didn't create a world for the wilderness. Chizkiyahu HaMelech, you didn't have any children. And for that, you're going to be cut out, not just from this world, the next. Amar le, so Chizkiyahu HaMelech says, yeah, but there's a reason. Why? Mishum dechazai li beruach HaKodesh dinafki menai binyan de la ma'alu. He says, there's a reason I didn't have children. I saw that my future brings horrible children, like Menashe HaMelech, who's going to single-handedly destroy not just everything Chizkiyahu HaMelech did, but everything the previous kings did. I am going to bring the worst person in history into the world. So for the benefit of society, I decided not to have children. So far, Chizkiyahu doesn't sound unreasonable. Everybody wants kids. You know, they say kids are so cute when they're little, you want to eat them up. And then when they get big, you wish you did, right? All kids are cute when they're little, but sometimes kids turn into monsters. He said, I saw in my future that the child that I will bear and bring into this world is going to be a monster. Amarle, so he says to him, Yeshayahu says to Chizkiyahu, he gives him musar. He says, B'hadei kafshe derachmana lemalach. Why do you involve yourself in Hashem's secrets? Mai dimi mipaktata ib'elach. I have to say my Aramaic is not as good as my Hebrew. Lach lemebad umad denicha kame kucha brichuhu levad. Chizkiyahu HaMelech, why do you get involved in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's secrets? Wouldn't it make sense that you do what you're supposed to do and let him do what he's supposed to do? The Navi is giving him very, very strict musar. With all the calculations and all the good logic and all the reasoning and rationalization that you, Chizkiyahu, are coming to the table. And unlike us, where we make up stories why we don't do things, Chizkiyahu HaMelech has a very valid reason why he doesn't want to have kids. He sees the future of the children he will have. The Navi tells him it's not your business. That's not your problem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you, have children. He didn't ask you to come meddle with his secrets. Let him do his job, you do his. Now the end is very interesting, because Chizkiyahu HaMelech says to Yeshayahu, great, so why don't we do this? You give me your daughter as a wife, and then maybe my genes and your genes together, maybe we'll produce something better. Now whether or not that happened, that's a good question. The Chachamim are not necessarily in agreement. But here you find a character where he's thinking not just too much, but too much in the wrong place. Because thinking, so unlike other religions, our neshama sits in our head, right? Not in our head. What makes us qualitative differently, right? They tell us we're 96.7 chimpanzee. Could be. What makes us qualitatively different than animals is the fact that we have intellect. We have the ability to choose, to think. So we never want to turn off our brain. But when the Torah tells us, Tamim tiyeh im Adonai Elohecha, we have a commandment to be whole with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you look into Rashi over there in Devarim, he says, Shelo teharher achar ha'atidot. What does it mean to be whole with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Don't go try to find your future. Don't go to all the astronomy and astrology and all the people who are going to read your palms. Aside from that, they're scamming you and taking your money, because if they really could read the future, they'd be billionaires. The fact that they're doing it in Pacific Beach over there for $5 is because they're scamming you. You understand? Don't delve into the future. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to do, he has a plan for the world. He didn't ask you or me, and thankfully, because I would never want to run such a world. He didn't ask us to take on the world's problems. He simply asked us, take care of yourself. Do the mitzvot. Most of the time, people like to worry about everything else but the present, because it's much simpler. If I worry about my past, and I'm constantly planning the future, I never have to take responsibility for today. And you find this a lot. People are always busy either feeling bad about things or worrying about things. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, it's very simple. Take care of Hayom, today. That's Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Now I want to introduce you to Chizkiyahu HaMelech's son. Who is this Menashe? What do we know about him? What do we know about his actions? And we're going to share some really harsh things about him. And before I want to share the harshness, which is written in the Torah, you should know it's a mistake. I once went, I can't tell you where, but somewhere where I grew up. I went to a girls' school, not the one I attended, and I asked them to show me the Chumash. And they told me the girls are not allowed to learn from a Chumash in this school. Okay. I said, so what do you teach them? They made photocopies from the Chumash, papers. And they showed me the booklet. And whereas HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought it was appropriate to put in the story of Yehuda and Tamar, and to put in the story of Mechirat Yosef, and the fact that Rachel and Yaakov, when they meet, they kiss each other, this school was more religious than God. And what they did was brilliant. They had a redacted Torah. Now you think I'm joking. You can find these copies floating around in my neighborhood where they are fully edited out. See, they already got sophisticated. They made booklets where you don't even know there's things missing. When I grew up, my mother had a job in my school and also in the boys' school. So not in the Tanakh, okay, not in the school I went to. But they would take all the English secular studies books, so science and science and history and literature. My mother's job, because she's holy, so she's allowed to read the things that are not holy. You understand? She had to take the books and censor them. And with those big permanent markers, you know the ones that have like gray rings on it, and they smell so good? Yeah? Okay, so she would take them, and she would sit for days before the school year starts, and she would have to black out any words. So like love and touching and hugging, anything that made people human, God forbid. And then of course, bigger things like evolution. They would just put markers on. But what they didn't realize was that the moment you make something black in the book, guess what happens to a 10th grader? You open the book and the only part you want to read, everyone would go like this. The only part you want to read is the blacked out parts. I could tell you, I always told them they should black out the parts they want us to learn, because the other parts nobody reads. You're just busy. The Torah doesn't edit things out. We're going to read things now about Menashe HaMelech that are very, very harsh. And I want to preface it with a Gemara to understand, on the one hand, the greatness. Asher bachar b'nevi'im tovim v'ratza b'nevi'im. Right? We say this before we read the Haftarah. And yet the ability to hold the same feeling and say, but they're not God. And they're allowed to be critiqued. And we are allowed to learn lessons that are so important to us.
The girls' school that you're talking about, they're not allowed to learn from a book because it's a book, or because it's like the photocopy is okay because...
Okay, so I can't speak for them, but I can tell you that there's a Gemara that says you're not allowed to teach your daughter Torah because Kilu Mlamed Bitot Tiflut. So they interpret tiflut as any kind of avodah zarah, and God forbid if girls become educated, that you never know. They might end up like me, marry people who are Sephardic. You never know where they might go, chas v'shalom. So you never know what kind of crimes they may end up committing. You know, that must be it's the Chumash I started with, you see. But that's where it comes from. It comes from the idea that women are not allowed to learn from an actual Torah. In fact, for example, my grandmother, she would always read us on Shabbat after we went to the Bet Knesset and we came to her house. She would read from a book called Tze'ena. We say Tze'ena, but it's Tze'ena Urena from the pasuk Tze'ena Urena Benot Zion. Bidyuk. What was this book? It's a book that takes the entire Parshat HaShavua and translates it into Yiddish, and it puts all the midrashim inside. It was designed, the women would always come together. The men go to the Bet Knesset, the women come. They sit around, they eat cakes and cookies, and the lady of the house reads it to us. And my grandmother read beautifully. She would sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours. People would come and go, but she stayed. She would sit there and read the Torah to us.
that book, for example?
Yes.
As long as it's not an actual.
Yes, correct. Kana, you had a question?
In Shabbat morning, are you guys allowed to hear it?
So I can't speak for their community. In my community, we would go to the Bet Knesset, the girls. I could tell you where my Bet Knesset that I grew up in, right next to it, there was another tiny, they're called shtibluch, they're tiny little synagogues. They did not have a women's section because the women from their community never go to the synagogue. I asked them, what about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur? What would happen on Rosh Hashanah, the ladies would come outside and they would come blow the shofar loud enough that the ladies and the babies, and it was, you had to see between all the bamba flying on the floor and all the babies, I don't know whose shofar was louder, the babies who were crying or the actual, but that, they don't have a ladies section there. Meaning, that synagogue just didn't have a ladies section. And like Dalia said, there are many communities, not just in the Hasidic world, that, it's only in modern America that the synagogue has become such a central place. It used to be that all of Judaism was in your home. This week we went to Esther. I'm deviating, but I think it's important. We went to your house, Esther, and my mother-in-law did a beautiful shiur and taught us how to bake challah together. And Esther was busy stuffing us with more burritos and more tea and pumpkin spice lattes. The Jewish home was always the center. The men went out to the Bet Knesset, they prayed, they came home. But who taught the children? The mothers. The mothers. Yes, we were the ones teaching the Aleph Bet, Netilat Yadayim, Shema Yisrael, from A to Z. I'm not telling you it's a bad thing to come to the synagogue, but the tragedy of when the Jewish home falls apart, so you're missing a center. That has to be the center base where all the culture of Judaism, of Torah and mitzvot, the kid is 9 months old. When you're making brachot while you're feeding the baby, that's when the child learns. Not when they come for 2 hours on Saturday night to kiss the Torah. Right? So what happens? I want to tell you a Gemara about Menashe HaMelech before. Oh, can I get a cup of water? Oh, thank you. Before we talk about what he actually did. So if you can, look with me at, we're going to go back in the Talmud. But this time we're going to, no, do you want it? This, no, אני כן.
In her school,
אני
yes.
כן. כן, תודה לאל. Yeah. No, תודה לאל. I went to a school that I'm very grateful for. I got a very good education. Okay, if you look at, so we're in the Talmud. Go down to Sanhedrin. And we're looking for Kuf Bet. So that's going to be 102. And it's going to be Amud Bet, the second page. Again, we're going to the Talmud, Sanhedrin, 102. And then we want to go to the second page, so Amud Bet. It's going to be 102b. And if you go down a little bit, just to number 2. Okay? So it starts off with a story of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, not Rashi, a couple of thousand years in between them. Here's a story about Rav Ashi. So he's teaching his students, sitting around like this, they're learning Torah. And at the end of the conversation, they're ready to wrap up their learning. Rav Ashi turns to his students and he says, okay, מחר, אמר למחר נפתח בחברינתה מנשה. Tomorrow we're going to start with our friend Menashe HaMelech. Give me just a second so I can... Second. Okay. Here we go. Last time you gave me with the nikud and I liked it. Okay. Here.
Good?
No.
I can.
Can you? Okay, give me just a second.
Separate for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't matter for now.
this load, then this will be the right.
Yeah. קשה.
It should be right there. It's not up.
It's right here. 1 second.
No, it's
It is.
1 or 2.
Nope. Okay, give me just a second. I want to get with give me a second. I'm gonna find the text for you.
B.
Yeah, 102B. Let me see.
Of this
Okay. Thank you. Yeah? Okay. Oh, he says, okay. רבשי, okay, השלושה מלכים, למחר נפתח בחברין. He says, we're going to finish for tonight learning. Tomorrow, we're going to start off with our friend or our colleague, the 3 kings. That night, what happens? אתה, מנשה, התחזה בחלמי. That night, Menashe HaMelech comes to Rav Ashi in a dream. Amar, so Menashe HaMelech says to him, Chavrach, I'm your friend. V'chaverei da'avuch karit. You called me, I'm like your colleagues. Do I know you? Am I your friend? Am I your father's friend? So Menashe HaMelech looks at him in his dream and he said, tell me, Me'echa bat lemishra hamotzi? Do you know the halacha of where you're supposed to break bread? Because you know there's a halacha of where you're supposed to start. The middle, the beginning, the end. Amar le lo yadana. Rav Ashi says, no, I have no idea where you're supposed to break the bread. Amar le, so Menashe HaMelech says, oh, Me'echa David lemishra hamotzi lo gmir. You're calling me your colleague. You don't even know the simple halacha of how to cut your own bread. Yeah? Menashe HaMelech is telling this to Rav Ashi in his dream. He said, you dared to call me your colleague. Tomorrow we're going to learn about my buddy Menashe, my colleague. You don't even know a simple halacha. So Rav Ashi says, V'chavrach karit lan, and you called me my friend? Agmereli. So Rav Ashi says, teach it to me. Teach me the halacha. And he said, I promise you, ulemachar darishna le mishmach bepirka. I promise you tomorrow when I go teach my students, I'm going to repeat it in your name. Amar le, so Menashe says to Rav Ashi, Mehecha dekarim bishula. You want to know where to cut the bread from? You cut it from the place where it rises and that's where the crust gets. That's where you're supposed to cut the bread. So Rav Ashi says, Machar dechakimtu kulehai. Since you're so learned, you're so wise, you're so smart, ma tamaka palchitu lavodat kochavim. How could it be somebody so learned, such a brilliant Torah scholar, how could it be that you and the entire nation went and served Avodah Zarah? Amar le, so Menashe answers Rav Ashi the following. He says, I havatatam. If you were living in my generation, havat nakitna bishupulei glima, ratat abatrai. If you were living in my generation, Rav Ashi, you would have picked up the hems of your robe so that you could run faster to serve Avodah Zarah. That's his answer. And then the Gemara continues. The next day, Rav Ashi goes and he says, I want to introduce you to one of my masters, one of my teachers, Menashe HaMelech. But you have over here a fascinating exchange, which is, Rav Ashi starts off with this, who's Menashe HaMelech? We're going to talk soon about one of the greatest sinners. It's not weird that Rav Ashi calls him, our friend, our colleague, almost in a mocking, what our friend. Menashe HaMelech comes to him in his dream and he shows him, you think I'm your friend? You don't even know this much of the Torah that I know. Why would you degrade me like that? And Rav Ashi's response is, I don't understand. If you're such a great Torah scholar, if you knew so much, how could you have done what you did? And Menashe HaMelech answers him something very important. Rav Ashi, by the way, you could tell here that the Jewish people did not wear fancy suits, because he doesn't say if you would have picked up your suit and coattails with your tuxedo and top hat, or your shtreimel. He didn't say that. He said if you would have picked up the hems of your robe, you wouldn't be able to run fast enough to do avodah zarah. You're judging me. You're judging me in the generation you live. Come join me in my shoes, and let's see how well you would do. And Rav Ashi, in his humility, accepts that. He accepts that rebuke. And our Chachamim tell us in Pirkei Avot, it says, Al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia limkomo. Don't judge your friend until you're in their place. And to be fair, we are never in somebody else's shoes. You know, they say when somebody fights with you, try walking for a mile in their shoes. That way you're a mile away, and you also got their shoes. But the truth is, we don't understand what people's struggles are. We don't understand their nishamot, their challenges, and the things that seem so simple and easy to us can be the most complicated thing to another human being. It doesn't mean we can't critique. It doesn't mean we shouldn't critique. It just gives us a little humility of when we're learning. So with that in mind, I want to look at Menashe HaMelech a little bit with you. We're good with time. Okay.
Question.
Sure.
Well, Menashe is saying, in the times that I lived, there was such a strong draw to Avodah Zarah. But he grew up in a home that was full of Torah, full of holiness. How could he say that?
You know, Marlene, you're touching on something so important, which is sometimes we have influence on so many people, and when it comes to our own family, those are sometimes the hardest people to be able to affect change on. We're talking about a king who influenced the whole nation. You know, there's a teaching that it says, En Navi Biro. A person can't become the prophet in the city he grew up in. Why? It's very simple. People do this all the time to my husband. Oh, I was by your brit. I remember when you were a nobody. There's a certain amount of, to me, you're still 12. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm now the chief rabbi of the whole Jew. It doesn't matter. And I think, Marlene, a lot of times you see this where there are some great leaders who are able to affect so much change outside. And when it comes to their own personal lives, not as effective. Not as effective. And it could be two things. It could just be, that's the way the world is. I think there's a flip side to it. Sometimes, not always, sometimes what leaders present to the world isn't always what you see at home. And sometimes children suffer in ways that outsiders don't. So you could have students and you could have friends. The people of the home are the ones who see you in your bad moods. They see you when you wake up. They see you when you stubbed your toe. They see you in different ways that they don't always shine the best light on you. And sometimes, I'm not saying always, but sometimes the leadership, it's easier to influence other people because they only see you temporarily. So they get to see all the good parts that you want to present to them. Whereas the people in the house, they also see the other very human side, and it makes it harder. So, but there's one more thought, and I saw it and I don't remember where. So when I remember, Marlene, I'm going to get it to you because I saw this question, I think, from the Malbim or the Radak. Yeah.
But sometimes the father is the best, and unfortunately, the child is the worst.
Yafe.
Or there is two children, one is the best, and one is the other way around. So
Yafe.
you never
So Dalia's touching on what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which is sometimes it has nothing to do with you. You can be the best parent in the entire world, and in the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave every single child bechira. Every child has free will. And if we as parents, we did everything we can, at a certain point, our responsibility ends. And the feeling of, but what did I do wrong, also has to end. I'm going to recommend, for those of you who haven't already, Chacham Yonatan's article in the Chavurah book on the Yamim Noraim is exactly on this topic, which is what happens when parents try so hard. They give their child the best education, everything in the world, and the child still comes out really awful. What happens then? So thank you for bringing that up. Look at Melachim Bet. Let's look at Perek Chaf Aleph. So Melachim Bet, Kings 2, chapter 21, Pasuk Aleph. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech passes away, and his son Menashe takes over. Menashe HaMelech is the youngest king we ever had. Ben 12 shana, we're on verse 1. Ben 12 shana Menashe b'molcho. He starts his reign of leadership at 12 years old, which is something interesting on its own. ו-55 שנה מלך בירושלים, and he's king for 55 years. ושם אמו, Chevtziba. And the name of his mother is Chevtziba. There's actually a kibbutz in Israel named Chevtzuba. Ken. What happens? Vayas hara b'nei Adonai. Unfortunately, he does the evil in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki to'avat hagoyim asher horish Adonai mipnei b'nei Israel. And he does exactly that which all the nations around the Jewish people used to do. But our mitzvah when we came to the land of Israel was to ubiarta et hara mikirbecha, to get rid of all the idols, to get rid of all the evil. And unfortunately, Menashe HaMelech goes and does not just what they did, but even worse. Vayashav vayiven et habamot asher ibed Chizkiyahu aviv, and he goes and he rebuilds all the bamot, so all the altars that were not licensed, that Chizkiyahu HaMelech had managed to destroy. Menashe HaMelech goes and builds. Vayakom mizbechot leBaal, he builds mizbechot to the Baal. Vayas asherah kasher asa Achav melech Yisrael, and he builds horrible avodah zarah, horrible idols. Vayishtachvu l'chol tzva HaShamayim ve'avodotam. Any idol you could think of, he brought. So he was very pluralistic. This wasn't an exclusive, we only do Baal or Asherah. It was any kind of religion that, aside for Judaism, you bring that back. Ubanab mizbechot bebet Adonai, asher amar Adonai b'Yerushalayim asim et shmi. Where does he build them? You know, imagine you come to my house. Imagine I meet you outside and you spit on me. Okay, I keep walking. Imagine you come to my house because you're my guest and then you spit on me. You're my house. Where's he building these avodah zarah? He didn't go like Yerovam to Dan, Beersheba, Bet in Yerushalayim. You want to do bad things, at least go outside. ויבן מזבחות לכל צבא השמיים בשתי חצרות בית אדוני, in the courtyard of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. והעביר את בנו באש. One of the famous avodah zarah was known as the molech, if you recall, one of the cruelest sacrifice where they would take their children and pass it through the flames of the avodah zarah. It's why you find in Israel, and you'll see right here, Vonen, v'nichesh, v'asa ov, v'donim, hirbe la'asot hara b'nei Adonai la'achis. He puts, if you go outside of Jerusalem, we say Gehenom, we improperly translate as hell. Gai Henom was literally the valley, right outside of Yerushalayim. That's where he sets up this big avodah zarah, where they would sacrifice their children. That is where Menashe HaMelech goes and kills his children, and he gets the nation to do the same. He also believes in all kinds of kishufim, all kinds of sorcery, all the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, we as a nation, we don't do this. וישם את פסל האשרה אשר עשה בבית, אשר אמר אדוני אל דוד ואל שלמה בנו בבית הזה, ובירושלים אשר בחרת, מכל שבטי ישראל אשים את שמי לעולם. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, my name is going to be forever. Unfortunately, that's where he took all the most horrible, cruel ideas of the rest of the world, and that's where he puts them. ולא הוסיף להגיד, רגל ישראל מן האדמה אשר נתת לאבותם רק אם ישמעו לעשות ככל אשר ציוויתים ולכל התורה אשר ציווה אותם עבדי משה. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm giving you this land, it's conditional. If you look into the Chumash, it's very conditional for us to have the land of Israel. What is it dependent on? It's dependent on us doing the right thing in the land. Unfortunately, when the Jewish people did not do the right thing, it says, Vataki et haaretz. What did the earth do to us? It vomits us out. If anybody who ever ate either food that was not good, and you have that feeling, you know, that suddenly you vomit everything, because unfortunately we see time and again in Jewish history that when the Jewish people are not treating the land that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us properly, immediately after that exile follows. ולא שמעו ויתאם מנשה לעשות את הרע מן הגויים אשר השמיד אדוני מפני בני ישראל. And what happens? He reintroduces everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, don't take from the nations. He institutes that. וידבר אדוני ביד עבדיו הנביאים לאמור. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends prophets. יען אשר עשה מנשה מלך יהודה התועב את האל הרע מכל אשר עשו האמורי אשר לפניו ויחתי גם את יהודה בגלוליו. The prophets come and say, Menashe HaMelech, you took an entire nation that was on the road to rehabilitation, and you destroyed them. לכן כה אמר אדוני אלוהי ישראל, הנני מביא רע על ירושלים ויהודה, אשר שומעה תצלנה שתי אוזניו. I'm telling you right now, the destruction is near. Not in your days, But this city that you have desecrated, it's not going to stay yours forever. ונתתי את ירושלים, את קו שומרון, and unfortunately we know the rest. Why? Look at pasuk Tedvav 15. יען אשר עשו את הרע בעיניי, ויהיו מכעיסים אותי מן הגויים אשר יצאו אבותם ממצרים ועד היום הזה. The whole purpose that I took you and separated you is so that you don't become like the nations of the world. And what did you go and do, Menashe? You brought them to our own backyard. וגם דם נקי שפך מנשה. He didn't just bring in all the pagan ideas. He murdered, mass murdered anybody that came against him. So much so, what does it say? וגם דם נקי שפך מנשה הרבה מאוד עד אשר מילא את ירושלים פה לפה לבד. מחטאתו אשר החטיא את ירושלים לעשות הרע בעיני אדוני. So there are a few ways to deal with people you don't like, right? When people tell you things you don't like, the wise people listen and they filter it. If you're telling me something, it doesn't matter if I like you, I don't like you, but if you're saying what's true, I hope I can accept it. There are other people who, instead of listening, they just silence the opposition. Anybody that stood up against Menashe HaMelech, he just slaughtered. The streets of Yerushalayim, we know, were flowing with blood. So much so that when later on in history, when Yirmiyahu HaNavi comes and he sees the streets of Yerushalayim flowing, he says, what's happening here? And the Jewish people are embarrassed. He says, tell me whose blood it is. Whose blood is boiling over here? They tell him, oh, this is from Zechariah HaNavi. He says, why did you kill Zechariah HaNavi? Because he came to give us Musar. One of the hardest people to change is people who have an inability to listen to Musar. And I'm talking to myself because Musar is not easy. Our knee-jerk response is to be angry. I hate you. I don't want to hear. Who are you to tell me? But if we were wise, Musar doesn't do anything to you. It's the best form of change. It's not a punishment. It doesn't hurt. You didn't lose anything. You just had another human being say, maybe you're not God's gift to humanity. Or maybe you're God's gift, but you're a little damaged and we could help fix it. You find over here, Menashe HaMelech destroys single-handedly everything that his father built. And more. I want to look at two psukim because I think they're so important. If you can turn with me to, let's look at the Navi Yirmiyahu. Open up in Yirmiyahu Bet. So you should know, the Navi in the times of Menashe is Yeshayahu. But we're jumping now to Yirmiyahu, who's next. Right? So look at Yirmiyahu chapter Bet. Pasuk Yod Gimel. Jeremiah 2, verse 13. Chapter 2, verse 13. Yirmiyahu HaNavi tells the Jewish people, he's giving them very, very harsh musar. He says, Kishtayim ra'ot asami. My nation sinned doubly. 1. Oti azvu. They left me. Who's me? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Oti azvu mikor mayim chayim. This is the source of the most pure, beautiful drinking water. What did they go to? Lachtzov lahem ba'orot ba'orot nishbarim asher lo yechilu hamayim. You see, if you told me that you went and you got an upgrade, okay, you shouldn't have left, but you got an upgrade. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the Jewish people musar and says, I don't understand. You left me, the source of life, and what did you go find better? All you went to find is broken wells that have no running water. Right, we know when Yosef HaTzadik was put into the well, right, it says he was put into the bowl, and it says, Va'abo rek en bo mayim. The well was empty and there was no water. From what I understand, Saba Yaakov, this is my mother-in-law's dad, whenever he wanted to tell you a person wasn't so intelligent, he would, in a nice way, use this pasuk, Va'abo rek en bo mayim, meaning the well is empty, there's no water. But if you look into the Rashi over there, he says it's true, there was no water. Aval nechashim va'akravim yesh bo. But snakes, scorpions, yeah, they were there. The Navi Yirmiyahu tells the Jewish people, you left HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who gave you a clear plan of, he gave you life, he gave you a manual of how to live it. I always see when my kids are building Lego, it comes with thousands of pieces. The greatest gift the Lego company does, not to me because I spend all my money there, but to them is that they create manuals. That's the difference between the real one and the knockoff. The knockoff, I always know, it comes with one paper and it says, construct. How am I supposed to know what to construct with 1,000 pieces? You look at a real manual, every single piece, it tells you take 4 of these, 6 of these, 12 of this color, step 1, step 2, step 3. Now you might look at it and say, oh, so many rules. You fool. So many rules to make sure that the end product comes out perfect. So these rules are actually phenomenal, because without them, you would just have 1,000 pieces of broken Lego. Yirmiyahu tells the Jewish people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the one who created you, he knows your mechanism. He gave you the exact instructions of how to work it. And what did you do? You didn't just leave me. You didn't just leave my Torah. You went to the fools of the world, who they themselves are so confused, and that's where you went to learn? See, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no problem with us going to the nations of the world to learn. Right? Our Chachamim tell us, Chochma bagoyim, ta'amin. Torah bagoyim, al ta'amin. You want to learn wisdom? Everywhere. Everyone in the world you can learn from. There is no such thing that there's a human being who doesn't have what to give you. There are even human beings you learn what not to do. Everybody you can learn something. Right? We're not racist like that. Just because somebody's Jewish doesn't make them more intelligent than somebody who's not. Yes, you can find very, very good intelligence in the rest of the world. Whether it's technology, engineering, psychology, you name it. Chokhmah was given to everybody. Torah? No, that's already exclusive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha Kehillat Yaakov. The inheritance of the Torah only belongs by the Jewish people. So how in the world are you going to go find it there when you're the only one who has it? That's what the Navi is giving Musar. Menashe HaMelech. You didn't just destroy the Torah. You then had nothing left. So what did you replace it with? Inferior quality. You went to the nations of the world. The Molech, that's who we're going to learn from? The people who are sacrificing their babies in fire, that's who we're going to learn from? What kind of craziness is that? I want you to look for a minute in Tehillim, if you can. Go into Psalms, Tehillim Kav Vav, which is going to be 106. Yeah, Tehillim 106, verse 35, Lamed Hey. Again, Tehillim Kav Vav, 106, and then it's going to be Pasuk Lamed Hey, the 35th Pasuk. So you find over here David HaMelech.
My other grandfather would say this pasuk all the time.
Really? Lamed Hey, verse 35. It's a beautiful chapter of Tehillim. Again, Tehillim Kav Vav. Kuf. קוף. נכון, כף וקוף נראה, על זה אני צריכה לעשות תשובה. קוף. And then למד ה'. למד ה'. יש? דוד המלך says, ויתערבו בגויים, וילמדו מעשיהם. So we mixed with the other nations, and we learned from their actions. Now, the problem is not that we learn from the actions of the other nations. Which actions did we learn? Oh, we learned the bad behaviors. Always the bad behaviors. The good things, of course, we're allowed to adopt. We're not an isolationist nation by our nature, but we have to have some kind of filter on. The good things from the rest of the world, of course we should adopt. Of course we should share. But why is it that every single time we mix, unfortunately, it's not the good things we learn. The first things we adopt are all the bad midot, all the bad character traits, all the things that the Torah warns us against. Suddenly those become the first way for us to become more like them. Why? There's something wrong with us. I mean, there's something wrong that when we go to the rest of the world, we should be not just strong enough, proud enough, knowledgeable enough to say, hold on, this is the knowledge I want. You see, I have a door in my house that has locks on it. The reason it has locks is very simple. I get to choose who comes in. As human beings, we also have to have these kind of filters. You don't just get to give me whatever you want. The world around us bombards us 24/7 with information. That's the world's job. You're being advertised to even when you don't even think you're being advertised to. That's the world's job. That's how marketing works. But our job is to become filters. Not everything that somebody says now suddenly makes it right. Just because it was spoken doesn't mean it had to have been heard. Just because it was heard doesn't mean it has to be internalized. I am allowed to filter things. I don't have to become, just because somebody throws trash, doesn't make you a garbage can. I don't have to take everything from the world. And the Navi and David HaMelech are giving us musar. You don't have to take everything. I want to look with you I think we have time. Let's look at the end of Menashe HaMelech's life. If you can turn with me, it's not going to be a Melachim. We're now moving all the way to the end. It's called Divrei Hayamim. So in English, it would be Chronicles, and it's going to be Chronicles 2. So Divrei Hayamim Bet. It's going to be Perek Lamed Gimel, so chapter 33.
Chronicles 2, chapter 33.
I see, I don't have it, so let me... I have to. Oh, blue. Here we go. Again, it's going to be Chronicles 2, 33, and then it's going to be the first pasuk, pasuk Aleph. Okay? Now, really, I have to tell you. So I'm going to backtrack, we read the story about Menashe HaMelech in Kings. Right? If you go, and I'm not going to go with you now, just in our time frame, if you look at Yeshayahu, the story repeats itself almost verbatim with some different changes. Why it repeats itself, what is the comparison, what is the difference, that's going to be homework for you to do. But just so you know, meaning if you'll ever bump into it and you say, 1 second, but I read it in Melachim, why am I now finding it in Yeshayahu? It's because the story repeats itself. Verbatim, the story of Chizkiyahu HaMelech and Yeshayahu repeats itself twice in the Tanakh. Yeah, just so you have that. But now we're looking at Divrei Hayamim. So I want to read with you. I'm just looking at the time. Okay. 5 minutes? I can do this.
And 10 if you want to push it.
No, we could do this. Okay, so the beginning is again repetitious. Matzat?
אני כבר גמרתי.
Okay, the beginning is a bit repetitious in telling us Menashe HaMelech becomes the king at age 12. He reigns for 55 years. He does all the evil. Let's jump down a minute to Pasuk Yud Zayin, the 17th verse. So hold your finger on that. Let's go back up a minute. I want to go to let's look at verse 10. Okay? Let's look at verse 10. וידבר אדוני אל מנשה ואל עמו ולא הקשיבו. And Hashem speaks to Menashe HaMelech and the Jewish people and they don't listen. ויבא אדוני עליהם את שרי הצבא אשר למלך אשור וילכדו את מנשה בחוכים ויאסרו בנחושתיים וילכיהו בבלה. So he sends Sancherib a second time. The king of Ashur, and they bind Menashe, and they drag him now into exile. They bring him to Bavel. Now Menashe HaMelech realized, the prophet was serious. It was nice and cute and fun and games as long as I was still sitting in Yerushalayim and nothing was happening. Now things are serious. The exile's near. He's going now in chains. He's the king of the Jewish people. They're shackling him as a prisoner, bringing him down to Bavel. He realizes, 1 second, whatever the prophets told me are true. The musar that for years, the rebuke they've come to tell us, they're actually happening. And I'm going to tell it to you, just in the interest of time, not read it. If you look into, so this is going to be the Talmud Yerushalmi. I'm not going there with you. But if you look into the Talmud Yerushalmi, Sanhedrin 10, so Yod, and you look at Halacha 14, there's a very interesting exchange where Menashe HaMelech goes down to exile. He's in chains. They're hurting him. It's not, you don't get a like free ride on an airplane down to prison where they then give you 3 meals a day. That's only in Israel, and a free education. We're talking about he's a prisoner. They're taking him the kingship. They're torturing him. And Menashe HaMelech starts praying. He starts praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, save me. Save me. I don't want to die. I don't want to be rotting over here in some kind of cell. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears his tefillot. And the angels say, one second. You're going to listen to him? Are you kidding? Do you know HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Don't get confused. You know Menashe HaMelech, he's the greatest terrorist of the Jewish people. He took your whole nation and destroyed them. He's the one that caused them to go into exile. Why would you listen to his tefillot? And Menashe HaMelech says something very interesting. He says, Hashem, if you listen to me, I'll know that you exist. If you don't listen to me, then you're probably just as good as any of the other gods, because none of the other ones have helped me. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the angels, be quiet. Because unlike you, I understand the hearts of human beings. I created them. And I see that Menashe HaMelech right now is doing Teshuvah Gemura. He's doing a pure, righteous Teshuvah. And the angel says, no. We're going to make sure that those chains are so tight, there's no way you're going to release him from anywhere. And says, no, I will. And he cuts out a hole. Now again, you have to learn this Gemara as an Agadah. So I'm not teaching you the Agadah. Like, what does it mean even? It says HaKadosh Baruch Hu cuts out a little square. Oh, back. So the angels say, but where are you going to let him in? It says that somebody who sins and causes others to sin, the gates of Teshuvah are all locked. There's no way back in for him. How's he going to come through? The doors are locked. The key is thrown away. It's too late. It's really nice that now he wants to do Teshuvah. It's too late. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't worry. Under my Kisei HaKavod, I know how to drill. I have some power tools. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu drills a hole. And he says, Menashe HaMelech, come. It's true that the normal gates of Teshuvah have been locked years ago. There's no way you can do standard Teshuvah. How are you going to ever come back? But I see your neshama. I see your heart. And I'm telling you, I will carve out another route. I'm going to make a bypass surgery. And even though all the other arteries are clogged, this triple bypass is going to work. And Menashe HaMelech does Teshuvah. He comes back home. He comes back to Yerushalayim. And if you look now at Pasuk Yud Zayin, so the 17th Pasuk, let's look at Yud Gimel. Vayitpalal elav, right? Menashe HaMelech prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, vayayetar lo. Hashem listens to his tefillah. V'yishma tchinato, vayeshivei Yerushalayim. L'malchuto, he brings him back home to Yerushalayim. V'yeda Menashe ki Adonai hu Elohim. And Menashe HaMelech does a complete teshuvah. I think there's something profound here, because most of us, when we study history, only learn the really ugly side of Menashe HaMelech. We learn about all the evil. We learn about how he took the nation and he destroyed it. Most of us never read long enough to know that he did teshuvah. He did it, teshuvah was fully accepted, so much so that he was brought back to Yerushalayim, to his kingdom. He tried to restore a little bit of the city. He tried to stop the Avodah Zarah. And here's the unfortunate part. Look at Pasuk Tedvav, 15. ויסר את אלוהי הנכר ואת הסמל מבית אדוני וכל המזבחות אשר בנה בהר בית אדוני. He tries to do the most he can. So the things he built, he destroys. He rebuilds the city walls. He completely clears the city of all Avodah Zarah. He takes everything out that he had brought that was foreign. וישלח חוצה, and he throws it all out of the city. ויבן את המזבח, פסוק ט"ז, 16. ויבן את המזבח אדוני ויזבח עליו זבחי שלמים ותודה. ויאמר ליהודה לעבוד את אדוני. And he commands the Jewish people to do teshuvah. But there's a problem. אבל עוד העם זובחים בבמות רק לאדוני אלוהיהם. The nation, they don't listen to Menashe HaMelech. It's nice that 55 years into his rulership, he decides to change. But 55 years of indoctrinating the people against God, it doesn't change. Just because his heart and his desire to be good lit up, he unfortunately has no success with the people. ויתר דברי מנשה ותפילתו אל אלוהיו ודברי החוזים המדברים אליו בשם אדוני. Okay, the rest is recorded. Look at Pasuk Chaf 20. וישכב מנשה עם אבותיו, ויקברו ביתו וימלוך עמון בנו תחתיו. He dies and he's buried with his ancestors. בן 22 שנה עמון במוחו, and his son Ammon takes over. And if you look at Pasuk Chaf Bet, ויעש הרע בעיני אדוני כאשר עשה מנשה אביו. Unfortunately, his son does what his father did in his early years. And he puts everything back, and that little window where Menashe HaMelech tries to change the tide, it's really too little and too late. And I want to take this apart and really end with this, where, first we talked about Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who, Yefeh Mod, exactly. We started with Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who, he's scared. He's scared to do things, and because he's so busy playing God, he decides not to have children. And the Navi gives him rebuke, and he says, you're not God. If you look into the Ibn Ezra and Shemot, he says, Machshavot Adonai amku, umi yuchal lamod besodo, velo yitkenu alilotav. With human eyes, we don't understand the depth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and all his calculations of the world. Chizkiyahu's mistake, stop making so many calculations. Sometimes we actually want to be good, but our fear of what if, it prevents us not just from doing bad things. Because it's good. It says, Ashrei Adam mefached tami, right? Praiseworthy is the person who lives with this constant awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when that fear becomes paralysis, so even good things we stop doing. Because we're so scared, what's if I mess up? What's if I do bad? And ultimately, we do so bad because we don't do anything. You then move over to Menashe HaMelech, who his entire life persecutes HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His entire life is hell-bent on taking everything that his father did good and destroying it. And we didn't even touch the iceberg. We didn't touch the iceberg of the things that they would be X-rated if it was a movie, because you can't even say those things out loud. And yet, the moment he decides to do Teshuvah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, yeah. The angels, they say no. No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says yes. Rachmana liba bai. Hashem says, I looked into his heart and I saw purity. And here's the duality. Menashe HaMelech, does he do Teshuvah? Yes. Yes. Is his Teshuvah accepted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Yes. Do the consequences, though, of years of evil go away? No. And I think in some ways, that's something hard to swallow. Because a lot of times as we get older, we look back at certain things that we did. And it's hard, because as much as we can feel bad, and we can make sure we'll never do it again, there are certain consequences that don't go away. That's the bottom line. The choices that we make, I always tell this to my kids, I'm sorry doesn't take away the things you do, right? I'll give you an example. Do I have 1 minute? I'll give you an example. I'm going to end with this. In the United States, there are, on average, every year, 20,000 babies who are born with what's called NAS. And there are 40,000 babies who are born with FAS. What do they stand for, these numbers? NAS is neonatal addictive syndrome. Addictive or abstinence syndrome. Sorry, abstinence, I think. FAS is fetal alcohol syndrome. These are babies. So we're talking babies who were born a couple of hours ago, who because of the choices, and again, I'm not now blaming the parents and their life and how they got there, but simply because of the choices that the parents made, these newborns are born suffering. What do I mean suffering? The NAS are children who are born of parents, specifically mothers who have drug addictions, that are then passed on to the children. And these children are born crying and irritable and with withdrawal, and sometimes, unfortunately, don't even make it. Fetal alcohol syndrome is parents who drink, specifically mothers, and the children are born with cognitive disabilities, developmental disabilities. Their features aren't fully developed. Their brains are significantly smaller. And our Chachamim tell us, right? It says, Avot achlu boser, v'shene banim tekena. The parents ate fruit that was not ripe, and the children's teeth suffered. And there's this duality, and I want to give you food for thought, which is, on the one hand, we have to think about our actions. Not overthink like Chizkiyahu, but think because our actions really matter. Saying, I'm sorry, I didn't think, it doesn't fix things. The flip side is also true. Just because the things that we did had consequences, it doesn't mean we could beat ourselves up forever. In the end of the day, Teshuvah works. The fact that Menashe Melech did Teshuvah and it was accepted is testimony that even with the horrific consequences, meaning he destroyed a nation that never got fixed, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because when he made the decision, I am changing and I am being better, now all the consequences, those are already God's problem, not his. And I want us to give ourselves hope, which is, on the one hand, we have to think through our actions. We also can't live with this constant guilt and regret of, well, look at the terrible consequences. When we do our part, we then have to, it says, Hashlech el Adonai yehavcha, v'hu yichal keleka. Throw your problems to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he's going to deal with them. And right now, if I don't throw the camera to Chacham Yonatan, I think we are going to lose our momentum for the tefillot. So I want to wish us all a Shana Tova. And again, a refuah shlema to Milka's brother. And Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to think and do teshuvah.